I think that the whole thing with the pandemic was a major power play on the part of the globalists to do a few things. Number one, to try to manipulate people through fear into cooperating and kind of getting that domination over people through the medical system, through that control, that psychological, just that fear aspect, to get them to cooperate and to shut down society. I mean, if you look at the damage that was done, how many small businesses went out of business, how the few big box stores, let's say Amazon especially, just doubled their wealth, they say, in a couple years, and basically taking business away from small business and the people that went into debt and lost their jobs. And it was, I feel like, an all-out assault on society to weaken it.
Yeah, those videos out of Spain yesterday were insane. Just some of the
horrifying.
It is horrifying. I agree. Yeah. And, a friend of mine made a joke. He said they should start the running of the bulls today. And, I was like, that's honestly not that bad of an idea. But, the other side of that coin is, what's the point of having a military if you're going to let what was very clearly a population of military working aged males coming across the border?
Every person I saw was a male.
Every single one. Yes.
Yeah.
It's just, that's on purpose, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
And, we experienced, good Lord, some of the videos we saw over the last, from really the Biden administration seemed that bad. Some of them, to me, it's just, I think it's what it is this way of bringing in people who know that, that you can make dependent on government sustenance, and then also who have no loyalty or desire to assimilate.
Yeah.
And, I'm trying to remember who said it, but the quote is, a tyrant prefers foreigners to citizens because they're easier to control.
Yeah,
and that's quite honestly, it seems like the playbook more than anything. But I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking today about your book. And I shared it with a few family members and friends as well, who have an interest in this sort of thing. And sort of, I have a really good buddy he's very into fieldcraft. I don't know if you've ever seen fieldcraft before. He'll go out in the woods with his sons, and he's taught them how to build shelters and traps for animals and all of this stuff. And so they can be very self-reliant if they need to be, which is probably one of the wisest things you could do for your child.
Yeah.
And, so I said, I was like, hey man, you should check this out, and give it a look. It's one of these things where the information you get about what's going on is going to be helpful. The more information you have, the better. So I truly appreciate you coming on and talking and getting this episode out with me. And I'd like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Yeah. So, Allan Paul Roberts, I'm basically a businessman, and I run a marketing firm. And 2024, I decided to write a book, but this is my first book. There may be a couple others, but just really concerned about the way the world was going back then, and still is, in many ways. Just kind of shifting around from country to country, where the craziness, it pops up everywhere, but it's the same. In my opinion, the same globalist plan, the same high-level goal, to basically tear down Western civilization and replace it, eventually with their cherished New World Order. And that's what the book's about. It's about the 11 pillars of society that I believe are under attack, and it's the evidence for that. And then in the final third of the book, it's basically, what do we do about it? How can we prepare ourselves? How can we become resilient and resist it and get the word out so that we can stop it ultimately? That's the hope.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to get to that, your take on stopping it, but your book begins a very unique way. And I just wanted to know if you could just walk us through about, the morning where you had this realization that like you needed to write this down, all these collapse points and get this out. Your motivation, I know is very, very God-driven thing, which I love, but would love to hear it from you.
Okay, sure. The funny thing is, not funny, but I almost didn't put it in the book because I thought if I am transparent about how this book came to me, people may not get beyond that initial chapter where I explained it. But in the end, I thought, you know what? No, because if this experience would not have happened, I would not have written the book. I'm too busy to take the time to write a book, and never dreamed I'd be doing that at this stage of my life. But anyway, what happened, to answer your question? It was the last summer of April 2024. I woke up around 4 a.m. Nothing special, no dreams, no nightmares. I remember nothing about it being special, just waking up. And as I'm laying there for, you know how you do for maybe 10 or 20 seconds before you get out of bed, you're just kind of laying there. And, I was going to get up and use the bathroom. Before I could get up, as I'm still laying there, I had this, the best way I can describe it is a flash, almost like a slam. It was this like instant knowledge that came with a ton of force and a ton of power behind it, almost as if it were electric, almost, where it's just the light is turned on in your mind and all of a sudden you're aware of something in a way that you can't deny it. And what it was the awareness of 6 pillars of society that were systematically under attack and in danger of falling. And the sense that accompanied that knowledge was that if something isn't done, society will come down. It's serious. And I was blown away by that. I got up. I was stunned, and I got up. I keep paper and pen in the bathroom. I wrote them down thinking it's around 4. I'm going to go back to sleep. If I don't write them down, I'm going to forget it. But so I'm back in bed now, laying there, just thinking about this and wondering what's going on. And then I had 3 more exactly the same way, like bang, 3 different pillars of society under attack. Same experience. Get up, write them down, back to bed. And I'm laying there for a couple minutes and then 2 more. And it was like they say, 3 times is a charm. That 3rd time, it was like, what in the heck is going on? How long is this going to last? What is happening to me? And I wrote them down. And, I just like to explain to people, I do have a daily prayer routine. I start every day with prayer and, kind of silent, I guess you could say meditation, thinking about what I read. I have a daily kind of like an inspirational book called God Calling that I use, and I just read the inspirational quote for the day, think about it. Sometimes from there, I go to the Bible, whatever, but I start each day with that. So my point is, when you're in the habit, and I've been doing this over 20 years, you just have a sense of when God is trying to show you something, even if you don't hear words or any strong impression, you just kind of have like a gut sense, pay attention. Yeah. And that's what happened that morning. Like I intuitively knew it was God revealing something to me, but I was not confused. I was just like, why would you be showing me this? These seem like news items, they're pillars of society. Only one had any religious overtone to it whatsoever. The others were completely informational, let's say. And I'm thinking, why, Lord? Why would you be showing this to me? Like I'm nobody. Why don't you show it to somebody who can make a difference? Somebody with connections, somebody in the news media. I don't know. Right. Show it to Tucker Carlson or somebody who can get the word out with an audience. And right. And nothing. And then it's just like the light comes on. It's like, do you want me to write a book? And if you do, what would the title be? And I kid you not, this entire title, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything to Usher in a New World Order, was there in a fraction of a second. It was just instant knowledge. There was no denying it. And because that answer came so strong, so hard and clear, there was no denying it. It was like, okay, you want me to write a book? I'll research the evidence for these 11 pillars and I'll see what I can find out and I'll put it together, and then about a minute later, I got these awful butterflies like, oh my God, I just committed to something. I have no idea how to move forward with this. It's intimidating. It's a ton of research. I don't have the time, that kind of thing. And I'm just like, how am I going to do this? And it was another kind of like instant. It wasn't forceful. It was very calm. It was just write it from the heart and it'll flow. Like, don't worry about it. Just move forward. Was kind of the implication of that. And so that's what I did. I just, I went through a process, booked 8 nights at the beach at my wife's encouragement, to go get away from it all with her, and just started researching and writing for eight days straight. And, except for breakfast and dinner, I was doing this up till about 11 at night each day.
Wow.
Super motivated. And that got it kicked off. And then from there, every weekend, all through the summer, that started, I started researching. It was mid-May when I booked the trip. And I just kept going every weekend, a lot of weekend nights, every single bit of free time, pretty much I was working on the book. And I finished it, I think it was September 3rd, and submitted it. It's self-published, so I didn't have to worry about people slapping it down.
Right.
I had an editor, but I didn't have to beg anybody to print it. So I just did it self-published because I knew it was controversial and probably nobody'd touch it. And it turned out to be true. It's on Amazon. You can get it. They'll sell it all day long, but they won't let me advertise it. I went through it. Took a whole day. I'm a marketing guy, but it took a whole day to learn, how to sell on Amazon, because that's not something I normally do. The whole thing. And it's the last thing where I press enter. It comes back rejected. I'm like, what do you mean rejected? And you can have this appeal process, and it's we do not allow advertisements on controversial topics. Is pretty much, I'm paraphrasing, but that's how it came back. And it's been that way. It's been that way a lot. My only recourse is like shows like this, to get it out through podcasts. That's really the most effective way I've found.
Yeah. I got to know, what was your wife's reaction when you explained to her that you had this epiphany, and how you felt, and where you felt it was coming from?
Yeah. So, I never got back to sleep after that. It's maybe 4:30 in the morning, and I'm heading downstairs, and I make some coffee, sitting at the table with a tablet, trying to figure out how I'm going to arrange my life to write a book that I don't have time for. And she comes down around maybe 6 o'clock or something. And I said, man, you're not going to believe what just happened to me, and explained the whole thing to her. And to my encouragement, really, she goes, I totally believe it. When do you want to get started? You need to get to the beach, go to the mountains, get out, just take some time to get away. But yeah, she was all in. And as I was finishing it up, it was late August. I remember she said to me, do you realize you gave up your whole summer? And I said, I didn't even think of it that way. And then I said, you know what? But so did you. Because she was a good sport about the whole thing. I mean, we weren't going out to eat very much, or we weren't doing stuff like you do in the summer. She had her life and I had mine, is kind of how it was, and she just let me go with it because she believed in what happened, and she really felt like the book had to happen. And she's the one that encouraged, the whole thing, get it off to a good start, get out of here for a while, and, get a jump start on it. So yeah, she was extremely supportive.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Shout out to her for being that supportive and letting you take off like that. Then not everybody would do that, That's great.
True. Yeah.
So when you're sitting down doing the research for this, and you kind of came on these, collapse points, as you say, for civilization, was there one in particular where you sort of realized that, like, this isn't just a failure of politicians, this isn't a failure of the system so far as, decades of, corruption or anything, that this was actually preparing people for something coming down the road, that this was intentional? Was there a point where you came away with that conclusion?
Yeah, it was pretty quick. I mean, when I started doing the research and found out how much information there was, like, the first 2 collapse points are national borders and security and police protection. And they kind of go hand in hand. I mean, you see the rush over the borders we were having under the last administration. You see the same thing going on right now in Spain, if anybody's watching the news lately. Just the flood. And we saw the same thing in Europe around 2011, the fall of Gaddafi, and, all the stuff in the Middle East where these countries were collapsing and the people were just fleeing into Europe, unrestrained. And when I did the study on that, on what was going on, I go, oh my gosh, this is a pattern. They did it in Europe. They're doing it in the U.S. Yeah, I found that it was happening in Australia. So it's pretty much the Western world as we think of it. It was pretty much going on everywhere, with very few exceptions. And so there was a pattern, and then you combine that with security and police protection. We had the defund the police movement. We had all this pressure on police to back off their normal policing routine, to go soft on crime. We had governors and district attorneys allowing people to steal $1,000 or so per store, per person. And it's not even, they don't even arrest them. Or if they do, they're right out immediately. And I thought, this is crazy town. Nobody could be this stupid. It seems like it's a popular thing on the conservative side to say, look how dumb they are. Look at how incredibly naive they are to allow this. I got to the point where I said, no. Nobody could be this naive. I'm sorry. Right. These are educated people. There's no way they don't know what's happening. And so you quickly get to the point where you say, it's a plan. And then the more research I did, the more obvious it was that, it is a plan. And we're seeing that plan roll out today across portions of the world.
Yeah. I always bring up Hanlon's razor. Are you familiar with Hanlon's razor?
Occam's, I think, but not what's Hanlon's?
Hanlon's razor says, never attribute to malice that which can be attributed to incompetence. And it's the point you're making that there's no way that this is that incompetent. This is 100% by design, and I do try to operate on a lot of different things, especially some of the even failures of bureaucracy, locally, people doing things, right? Like you can assume that somebody is incompetent or may not know what they're doing. And when you're having these like one-on-one interactions with somebody wherever at the DMV, they're not trying to be malicious. You just think that, okay, where's the disconnect here? How can I resolve this problem? That sort of like calms you down. You understand there's something going on. But something to this level, people that have been involved in these systems are politicians here in the United States, right? That have been career politicians since the 60s, 70s, 80s, whenever. They know what they're doing. They know what they're allowing, or at the very least, they're complicit in their non-action to do anything to stop it, right? And to your point too, so I was security forces in the Air Force, which is military police in the Air Force. And I was stationed in Germany a few years after the Germans brought in a bunch of the Syrian refugees after the Bashar al-Assad regime and all of the things that were going on there. Germany brought in a bunch of them. And Germany has this sort of guilty conscience, and has for a very long time, where they feel like they need to atone for what happened during World War II by, this, as somebody like Gad Saad would say, suicidal empathy, by bringing all these people in. And Angela Merkel was the chancellor of Germany at the time, and she brought on all these refugees, and instead of pushing them out to some of the bigger cities in Germany, maybe like Berlin or Munich or Cologne, she stuck them all in these like mid-tier cities. And there's a large group of U.S. military bases around a city called Kaiserslautern in the southwestern part of Germany in the Rhineland-Palatinate. And Kaiserslautern, it's like maybe a city the size of Sacramento. It's not as big as Berlin or Munich or sophisticated, I guess you could say. But there's all these military members. There is also the ruins of Barbarossa's castle in K-Town, which I'm sure you've heard of, at least heard of Barbarossa from history. A lot of people probably have. But one of the places they allowed all of these refugees to go was set up camp inside Barbarossa's castle, which is a historical area. It's a historical monument, I guess you could say. And they'd been there for years. And I was stationed there for 3.5 years. And it was a continual tent city, or a place where people were homeless. And of course, they have defaced it. They're, defecating, urinating all over the place. And just made me think, I worked with Germans who obviously they were very upset by what was going on. But again, they felt like their hands were tied. Local government not doing anything, national government not doing anything, Polizei overall not doing much, right? And the majority of the violent crime that we saw when I was there had a lot to do with refugees using vehicles as weapons, attacking people, for coming into certain parts of neighborhoods that they were trying to turn into, just a neighborhood for them or whatever. And so this has been going on for a long time in Europe. And they've been dealing with it for a little bit longer than Americans have, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's by design, because it's easier in a place like that. They don't have, these countries, I think people sort of assume because they're the West as well, that there's sort of this analog between us and Europe. And there is in some way, but it's not a total one for one. They don't have constitutional rights the way we do here in the United States. Obviously they do, they're God-given rights, but they're not enshrined in a document the way that our Constitution enshrines those rights. And so they don't have the Second Amendment. They don't have free speech. They don't have these things. And, I always use the example of there's no such thing as probable cause in Germany. You are allowed to get stopped, searched, all your items seized for no reason other than it's the discretion of the Polizei patrolman. And that doesn't happen in the United States. At least it's not supposed to happen here in the United States. So just using that as an example. Yeah. And so I think they did this to sort of come up with a blueprint to try to implement someplace else. It's the proving ground, as it were. And then I think it's on purpose as well, as the last thing I'll say before kicking it back over to you. But I think that it's one of these things that it's dehumanizing to put people like that inside of something that's so historically relevant to your culture, Barbarossa's castle, and some of these other buildings around Kaiserslautern that are historical, hundreds of years old, right? Because Germany's obviously very, very old. And it's dehumanizing, or it's humiliating to you and your culture. It's saying it's not as valuable as you maybe were taught that it was or whatever. And I always attribute it to saying, well, imagine if they stuck a bunch of Somalian refugees at Mount Vernon or Monticello or something like that. How terrible and how frustrating and angering that would be. What would that cause? And I think it's just part of this playbook to humiliate you and water down your culture and say it's not important. All of these things that are actual tactics that have been used over and over again, not just, in the 20th century and all of the, ideology that they've experienced, right? The Babylonians did it to people. The Romans did it to people, to take away what made them who they were. It's just an identity thing. There's a microcosm of that in the military where they shave your head and everybody goes by their last name. You're all equal. It's just this way of controlling you in that environment, right? Because you're molding something new, which is the point. Right. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, I do agree. And I think that's a key thing, is to water down your culture so that you no longer recognize it. If you think about what was happening in our own country, all the statues they were tearing down, that wasn't by accident. That's trying to take away your memory of your culture and where your country came from. And with this, effort under the prior administration to bring everybody in, to just keep flooding. And these, some of these smaller towns, like you were saying, these mid-sized cities in Germany, the same thing in the U.S., it doesn't take much for a smaller area to start losing its identity completely when you flood it with, 50% foreign invaders, like you said, who have no commitment to the culture whatsoever. Unlike in the past, when they went through Ellis Island and the whole process of becoming an American citizen, all the things you had to learn about the Constitution and everything else, you got to a place where you understood what the country was about, and most people were happy and proud to become an American. Well, there's none of that when you just leave your back door open and everybody just wanders in freely. There's none of that whatsoever. And your hospitals are overrun, your schools are overrun. Your services, at the same time, you're weakening the police, so there's less law and order. And, it's just that march toward chaos and destruction that they seem just hell-bent on. They're sneaky about it. But, sometimes it just comes in like a waterfall. I mean, what Biden did was a waterfall, but the media hit it to make it look like it wasn't. But anybody who was paying attention knew that this was a bold, brazen move to change the country. And I believe it goes all back to culture and control and everything else. It's not just votes, although that is a byproduct. Yeah, you flood the blue cities, and so they get more seats in Congress under the census, things like that. That's a reality. But I think the plan is much, much bigger than that, just as we're seeing all over Europe. You mentioned Germany. I have a friend in his 60s who, has a small business in Germany. He packed the whole thing up, went to Austria, where they speak German, and where things weren't quite so crazy. And I was talking to him on the phone. I said, well, why'd you do it? He said, I just could not take it anymore. The lawlessness, the two-tier justice. It sounded just like America in certain cities. He was using the phrase the two-tiered system of justice. The police aren't arresting these foreigners. They have rights we don't. And I just couldn't take the injustice of it anymore. I had to get out to somewhere where things were more sane. In Austria, they're all part of the European Union. I guess they all have some level of crazy town going on, but not so much there compared to Germany.
Right. Yeah. No, Germany, I would give you, is definitely the bigger heart of the EU, more so than Austria for sure. Economically and militarily and things like that. But to your point about two-tier justice system, I've used this story as an example before, but we got dispatched out to a guy using his car to try to run people over in a grocery store parking lot in Kaiserslautern. And they don't have access to guns and things like that. Knives get used often. Obviously, I was there too when the Strasbourg Christmas market, there was that drive-through attack as well. You may remember several years ago. Mm-hmm. But we got there, and by the time that we got there to support Polizei, we were there to support Polizei, right? We weren't the initial dispatch. They had gotten this guy. They cornered him in the parking lot with their vehicles. They were able to get him out. And, so in the process of them doing all this, they didn't kill anybody. He didn't hurt, he hurt somebody, a woman, basically her injuries were serious enough to where she was taken in an ambulance, but she was okay, evaluating and things like that. But at the end of this response, the police did not take this guy away. He was not arrested and taken to one of the stations in Kaiserslautern to be booked. He was handed off for medical evaluation. And so my friend, the German guy I was posted with, was sort of explaining to me what the actual Polizei members were talking about. Some of their, you could see, right? I could tell they're frustrated with something. What are they talking about? Basically just pissed that they're not able to take them down to one of the stations, wherever they came and dispatched out of and process this guy and do what they needed to do, that he was being taken for a psychological evaluation. And of course they felt well, it's because this guy is a Syrian refugee. If this would have been a German guy, then that would have done exactly what they
book at him. Yeah.
Exactly. But that's what they were mad about, because the power for them that they have, to go out there and serve justice the way that a police officer is meant to serve justice has been taken away from them. And the only reason why is because of the identity of the person who perpetrated this crime. And it's just incredibly frustrating, for them. And I felt for them. I was like, man, that's terrible. I can't believe that. He was driving around here, the other part of it too, which is sort of just a bigger slap in the face, is the doctors taking him away are German. Right? They're native Germans. They're not, somebody else. It's your own people is kind of the point I'm getting at doing this. And, not everybody, I guess, shares the same views, and they don't have a problem doing some of these things. And sort of really, turning their back on their own countrymen is sort of the way I look at that.
Yeah, when people's jobs are on the line, they get scared quickly. It's like, I got to support my family, I have bills to pay, and that really divides the true believer, let's call it, of a cause from the person that's just the weekend warrior, doesn't really believe it with their heart,
That's true. Yeah, very true. Totally want to get your opinion as well on everything going on with Anthony Fauci right now. And I feel like this, obviously, having a conversation about globalism and COVID obviously is a necessary part of that conversation. Just your opinion on what's going on with him and how that fits into this broader plan. Obviously, the pandemic is a very good case on control and how easily, like you said, people, when their jobs are on the line or whatever, their behaviors will, suit and follow that protection of their way of life, right? So what's your take on that, and how does that all fit in?
Yeah, well, the medical system is collapse number 8 in the book. That's one of the pillars of society, and that's one of the systems that is under attack. And it's so obvious, from COVID that it was and is. And I am happy that there's an attempt to expose what really went on. And he can take the fifth all day. And of course, MSNBC, CBS, others are going to try to defend him and make it look like these evil Republicans are just attacking a good man. But I think there's plenty of other people with their eyes open that see him taking the fifth all day and they interpret that as he's guilty as hell and he knows it. And that means a lot to me that the truth is getting out. Yes, I think that the whole thing with the pandemic was a major power play on the part of the globalists to do a few things. Number one, to try to manipulate people through fear into cooperating and kind of getting that domination over people through the medical system, through that control, that psychological, just that fear aspect, to get them to cooperate and to shut down society. I mean, if you look at the damage that was done, how many small businesses went out of business, how the few big box stores, let's say Amazon especially, just doubled their wealth, they say, in a couple years, and basically taking business away from small business and the people that went into debt and lost their jobs, and it was I feel like an all-out assault on society to weaken it, and I believe probably as a stepping stone toward, the next thing. I think they didn't get the level of cooperation that they wanted. And people, right now are not taking the boosters, very few. People are starting, to not get their kids vaccinated on the regular schedule. I mean, thank God RFK Jr. was working to reduce that schedule and pushing back. So people's eyes are being opened. But the whole game is manipulation and overthrow, and these people may lose a battle, but they never give up, and that's where I think we have to be vigilant. Yeah, we're seeing pushback, thank God, through the current administration at a level unlike anything I've seen in politics ever. Now, we all know it's not enough, but it's more than we've ever seen. I mean, I've never seen anything like this. And so that's encouraging. I mean, like when I say these people don't give up, if they would get into power again, it would go right back to where it was. We saw how quickly Joe Biden, all the chaos started with him. And so they're capable of that. We see what's going on in Spain with one leader who, is basically becoming like a Biden when it comes to immigration, and how it's causing utter chaos. So we can't sleep. We can't get comfortable with the progress that we may feel we're making. We have to stay alert and vigilant and committed to the cause for the long run, because they are committed to it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's why you've seen such an uptake in all of these invasive ideologies, whether it's the Democrat Socialists of America, the election of Mamdani in New York City as a socialist, and then again, as a Muslim, and there's a historical precedent for that union as well, right? Iran is a good use case for that, and the Red-Green Alliance of the Marxists that were trying to take power there in Iran, teaming up with, the extremist Muslims there, and you get the result that you had today, and I think that those two sort of see one another as allies of convenience, but those ideologies are very pervasive in the mind, and they, when you're experiencing the level of economic stress that people are, some of those ideologies become more appealing because it presents this simple solution. We'll just tax the billionaires and give you everything, and everything will be fine. And if something has I think that's probably one of the surest ways to know something is propaganda, is if it presents itself as a one-size-fits-all solution for every problem, which is exactly how that's marketed. You're a marketing guy, right? You know that's more than likely untrue, because there's nothing that exists like that. There are truly no solutions in life. There are only trade-offs, to quote Thomas Sowell there. But it's just one of these things that we have to deal with now. It's never going to get any better. It's not going to get better if you just stay idle and let it pass you by. And to see too, like Anthony Fauci talking in his diary, which I think is sort of hilarious that we're getting some of these Dear Diary moments, right?
Yeah.
But to know that he knew all of this information about the origins of the virus and that it was coming from China, and then his public position on these things was the exact opposite. And then two, hiding his own medical information when everybody has been saying over and over again, even having the I was in the military when we had that extremism stand down that the Biden presidency ordered, and then of course obviously the vaccination mandate as well. And that entire mess, people were hiding the medical information about what was happening to our military-aged males that were voluntarily serving. It's awful. Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Sam, to Shoemate, who, I can't remember his handle on X, but he's been one of the people that's been absolutely following and publishing a lot of that information. And then I know RFK brought in an Air Force. He used to be an Air Force officer as well. His name escapes me right now. Who experienced a lot of the same blowback from denying the vaccine in the military. But it's just a massive deal, and they're doing it to people. These are, America's best, as it were, trying to voluntarily serve in the military and being forced to do some of these things. And I want to go back to the thing I said about China as well. I've seen it sort of shared as this opinion that China, the CCP specifically, right, is the blueprint for what the globalists would like to do, this surveillance state, this control over everything, right? If you have a business in China, you also, are doing business with the CCP. They can come in at any point and say, right, what their housing market is like is just like this cycling of information through all these front companies for, quote unquote companies for the CCP. None of it is legitimate. They're just moving money back and forth with one another. And that's why there's all these people who lost their homes with these problems with like Evergrande or some of these other firms there in China. But do you believe that is sort of that globalist model that they're trying, and why the media seems to treat China as such a darling? They don't really get the bad press. Anything they come up with, even if it's a copycat of the United States, it's almost boasted as the equivalent or better. And that sort of marketing, that messaging, right, which is sort of your wheelhouse, is exactly how you get people to shift their thinking, right? Do you think that is on purpose? That's part of this overall plan?
Yeah, I do. I think that China is the model. It is the kind of like the experiment for the globalists. Number one, the whole West was deindustrialized, and all the production was moved there for a reason, right? But they're a model in the sense of the control. You mentioned the surveillance. I don't know if you've seen this. I saw to me, it was kind of horrifying. These school-age children from, let's say kindergarten on up are going through lunch lines, and they're getting they pass this camera basically that takes their ID for every step they make. They get in lunch, they get in line, flash, they're recorded. They got their lunch, and as they go to class, all throughout the day, facial recognition software is tracking everything they do. They have the social credit score system that was happening there. A version of it seems to be rolling out here with all the digital surveillance. And we've seen at the basically the Bank of International Settlements, they've talked about, and it's in the book, there's a video you can get to in the book through the QR codes that are all through it, but there's a video of the head of the Bank of International Settlements openly speaking about the level of control through the banking system that they will have over the entire world through the digital currency that's coming, that they're trying to promote. He talks about that, being able to essentially turn off your money or limit your travel, or limit how much you can buy of certain things that they approve of. So this is an end run on government. There's no legislation. This is just the banking system stepping in and imposing their tyranny. But yeah, China, I believe, is the model. It's communism. That's, a version of communism is basically what they're trying to implement here in America right now. It's no coincidence that the most tyrannical governments in the world have always been communist. They may give themselves a different name, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, but that's communism. It's communism in China. It's communism in China mixed with government control over the means of production in a way that they've managed with the help of the West, who was deindustrialized to their benefit. They've managed to have this appearance of financial power and control, but it was pretty much handed to them. Their system didn't build it. It was given to them. Yeah, the West's production was given to them. So it may look strong, but it's strong because it was handed to them, not because their system built that.
Yeah, no, correct. Obviously, what happened prior to the West stepping in was obviously Mao collectivizing everything and then trying to keep up with the Soviet Union and this sort of, I don't know, like self-aggrandizing and the massive amounts of hubris. If you look at what Mao wrote, the things he said, some of the people that documented what were going on around them, you know, and the way that he kept himself out of touch. There's a series of books. I can't remember the name of the author, but he talks about how everything was done by a phone call. He never really went out and saw anything. And so everything he was given was always just absolute lies from all the way from these cadre and these towns, whether they were just digging ditches or whatever, couldn't farm or anything like that. It was a massive failure. And he was being fed all this information that was wrong because people were afraid of what would happen, you know? And it's sort of wild when you think about it. But I actually think this brings up a good point from your book about how people project their own morality on other people, and they tend to sort of see these people in charge, right, as other, you know, caring human beings, sort of, right? Most people would help their neighbor if they saw them on the street struggling with something, and that's just sort of your natural inclination. Even if maybe you don't really get along with that person, you see them struggling, you're going to go over there and help them put that box in their car if they can't quite get it in there or whatever's going on. How do you, once you stop realizing, I guess, that projection of morality on the people in charge is not the same as you hold for yourself or the way you see maybe your neighbor, what starts to change for people and the way that they interpret these things that are being committed against them? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think, you know, what you're describing is a phrase for it is normalcy bias in a way. We tend to try to normalize things and have a resistance to thinking things can't change because we interpret things a certain way. And that normalcy bias, again, I think we apply to other people and to their motivations, thinking they're similar to ours. But the reality from what I've studied is that you know, many of these globalists are actually Satanists, which changes everything. And people, I mean, you know, Western society was built on Christianity. And you may say that, well, you know, half of Western society is pretty much, you could say, atheistic, agnostic, maybe not so Christian anymore. But all those principles are in our laws, it's in our behaviors, it's in the expectations of what we expect from each other. It's very hard for us to even imagine some other philosophy that's diametrically opposed to that. But Satanists are diametrically opposed. They have no respect for human life. Humans are like cattle. The ends justify the means. They don't feel accountable morally to a creator who's going to judge them someday. And even people who may call themselves agnostic or whatever, they still may have like a conscience to which they lean to make moral decisions. They may say, I don't believe in God because I don't want to have to come under that set of rules that might imply. But there's a huge difference between an agnostic, an atheist, and a Satanist, because somebody who truly believes that, it's like Jesus said, the enemy, Satan, comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He is the father of lies. And so somebody who is following the father of lies, who comes to steal, kill, and destroy, will end up with a whole different moral code and a whole different set of goals. And that's why I believe these people can do what they do. That's why they can bring a pandemic upon the world and have no sense of guilt. I'm not saying Fauci's a Satanist, but I'm saying there are people at his level who are and who don't have the moral code that we do. And it just completely changes what's possible, and it completely changes their long-term goals. You know, the long-term goal is world domination. and control at a level that you could call like China on steroids for the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
That's
do
what I
you
believe.
view this? Yeah, I agree with you. I agree that this is a spiritual war more than anything, and it shows up tangibly, in governance, economics, military, all these other things, because this is what human beings do. This is our interactions with one another, and so they inject this stuff into the world that we've created, and that's just the result of that. I think it's interesting too, because you were talking about like secular people, even if they don't even call themselves atheists, maybe they're just like, oh yeah, I was raised Christian, but I don't really practice. I don't go to church or anything like that. You can't escape the moral and ethical anchors that are inside of the fabric of our community and in our country. It is 100%. It's all rooted in Christianity. And that is the point, right? And it's almost, there's a biblical, I don't really want to say analog, but I guess like comparison here. The Bible tells you to stick to your traditions, and that's where you're going to learn about your faith, and you're going to learn about getting to heaven. And Jesus didn't hand us the Bible, right? We have all these church fathers that were teaching us about these things, and if you lose that tradition, the same way you lose the traditions inside of the documents that have given us the country that we have, and you get away from those things, you're no longer a citizen of that. You're a citizen of something completely separate. You're a citizen in name only. If you give up your traditions, whether it's, biblically or here, in the United States, the things that root us to the Bible, even if you want to look at it through 3 or 4 different lenses so you feel better about it, right? It's all the same tradition. And like I said, getting away from that is destructive inherently, whether you are trying to be malicious or not, almost like that Hanlon's razor thing we were talking about. Your incompetence about the design of our government is actually destructive because you haven't taken the time to learn about it, to understand anything about it, And to me, it is spiritual. Do you feel like this is sort of, and I'll say this, like I've never really spent too much time wandering into like eschatology, but do you feel like this is, the steps leading up toward the end times is what's going on, this mass surveillance state finally being able to being perpetrated around the world because of technology and our digital way of life? Is that kind of how you view this?
Well, I'll put it like this. The people that have the evil intent, I think they do. I think they are pushing for that as hard as they can, and they would like to see it all come crashing down so they can implement their system. I don't necessarily think that we are necessarily at that time. I think that we could be at a turning point, like what do they call that, the fourth turning? We could be at a turning point where there's enough pushback and enough realization as to what is going on that it actually turns the tide and we avoid the iceberg. I think eventually, what the Bible describes, with the mark of the beast and the total control over buying and selling and all that, I personally think that's further down the road. And there's people that are trying to rush that. But I don't think the time is now. I think there's a chance, that we can avoid the whole thing because, I was thinking about it. I was pretty far into the book when it finally occurred to me, because in the beginning at writing it and everything, I'm thinking, what's going to stop this? This feels unstoppable. The momentum toward this feels unstoppable. And then it just kind of hit me like, wait a minute, I was shown this for a reason. And if I'm supposed to write about it, it's for a reason. And the more I thought about it, is the reason is to avoid it. This is just one more voice, one more way of getting awareness out there among thousands of ways. I mean, when you think about what's happening in the alternative media, you think about even people like Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, some of the big names that have really woken up lots and lots of people. But then there's all the smaller ones that are doing their part too. And how since Trump, the fake news concept, how many people really do see it now as fake news. I mean, he called it out, and we kind of take that phrase for granted, but the level of awareness that has grown toward resisting fake news and looking for the truth in alternative places is huge. And so I do not take it for granted that we're going that way and that it's inevitable. I really think there's a good chance we can turn it around. I do believe, though, ultimately it is spiritual. And I think that each believing person needs to be on their knees, so to speak, every day asking God to save this nation. I mean, that's what I do. I think I ask him almost every day, please save this nation. Help me do whatever I can to help save this nation. I believe God wants to save it. Just like he wanted to save Nineveh and he sent Jonah in there as a warning and they repented and it was saved. It can look dark. It's looked dark before when Hitler was looking like he was going to take over the world. It looked dark, and enough good people did the right thing that we pushed back and that did not succeed. The Soviet Union eventually fell after 70 years. Things can look terrible. It doesn't mean that's the way they're going to stay. So I think there's hope. As a believing person, I go back to that Old Testament scripture. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, basically turn from their evil ways, I'll hear from heaven and heal their land. And that's the principle. And, but you look today, who's called by God's name? It's the Christians. They have God's name right in their name, Christ, and, today it's the Christians who are called by God's name, and they're the ones who have to pray and fast and spread the word and be honest and be fearless and be bold, in getting the truth out. I think it can be turned around. I really do. I'm hopeful for that.
Yeah. I hope so too. I hope you're right. Yeah. Truly. It honestly always makes me wonder. I see people ask this question online about who is they when, everybody refers to they or the globalists. Like in your mind, I don't, pinning it to one person, obviously I think is not realistic. A group of people, right, has to be, but in your eyes, where do those roots live? Who are the they, right, so to speak?
Yeah, I think, and I do get into the book,
right.
The thing we have to be careful of is the people change. And just because they're a member of an organization doesn't necessarily mean that they're corrupt and evil and totally in on what's going on. But as a general principle, you can look at the forces that tend to control the world at a very high level. And I'll start with the banking system.
Okay.
I think the people who are truly in control of the global banking system are key players. The Bank of International Settlements, the Federal Reserve and all the related banks, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, China, all the entire worldwide banking system. Those people have an incredible amount of power. And I think a lot of the power structure resides there. And I believe that among them are some people who really want to control the world. So money is the highest level, but you look at the main levers of society. You look at the main systems like the education system, the media, the mass information system, the control points within the media. A lot of these people are all working together. It's almost like there's a higher controlling hand that is passing down information to them. That's why, almost all the mainstream media repeats the exact same talking points almost to the word and how fast it happens. They get their marching orders. They're reading the teleprompters that are supplied to them, from organizations that control, it's in the book, the organizations that have been set up to control the news media. So, and then you can look at the military structure around the world too. The heads of the intelligence agencies. There's been a lot of corruption there. The CIA, all the other three-letter agencies, their equivalent in Europe, in the UK, and in all over the world, in Israel, in Australia. You know what I mean? These agencies that work together almost like they're above government. It's like they're at a layer that's above the presidents and the rulers. So these are the huge levers of society. And so I think at each one of these, there are people who are basically on that team who want to tear it down, and they work together. The World Economic Forum, the Davos Group, things like that. There's people in these organizations that are all kind of part of the same big club. And see, this is kind of what the book walks you through. When I say it like I'm saying it now, there's probably people hearing it who are saying, there's no way, that can't be true. But the book walks you through from start to finish, through these examples of how it really is true. And you can't solve a problem if you can't admit the problem's there. And so if we have to gain the understanding if we're going to gain the ability to start turning it around. And so I would just encourage anyone who's listening to consider getting the book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything, and also to just outside of that, just start connecting dots on your own and resist the urge to push things out of your mind that don't make sense. Be the person that says, wait a minute, what's going on here and why is it happening? And take the time to think it through. And as we gain that discipline, all of a sudden a lot of dots start connecting that otherwise we would have just let go and brushed aside and never really thought about. And I think that's why the alternative media is as big as it is today, because people know something's wrong, and in their own way, they're trying to work through it, right, and to overcome it.
One of the questions I had for you is, there's always been a rise of civilization and organization and the success of, whatever that looked like. The Roman Empire eventually, went from the Republic to an empire, and it saw, massive amounts of success. The British Empire saw massive amounts of success. All of these things, they happened, and, obviously they collapsed for one reason or another. And for centuries, there's been studies, people have written books, people have written, whatever you want to call them, essays about the rise and fall of civilizations, and that, they attribute to, something like a cycle, essentially, that this is just what's going to happen, that man will create, the society where they really don't have to want for everything, and that man's natural state of being is to struggle and need struggle to be able to grow, and that's just an inherent thing you can't get out of. And so even when things are quote unquote perfect, that there is still a resistance and struggle against that perfection. And that's what where we wind up, and people trying to dismantle all of these things that created the goodness around you. It's just this natural proclivity that man has. It's going to build and then destroy, and build and then destroy. So I guess my question is, how is what's going on today any different than what happened where the British Empire stopped building and started, focusing more on being the financial center of the world and managing money versus, industrializing, and, where do you see it being different this time than any other cyclical time where civilization rose and fall?
Well, I think what has the potential to be different this time is there seems to be an awareness among enough people to cause the pushback. And so ultimately, I'll also say this, I do think it's a spiritual condition that, you have, let's say, forces for good that start a new system that has a lot of, let's say, virtue to it. And over time, corruption enters in and starts to tear it down. And that does seem like a cycle that repeats over and over, that corruption enters in, moral corruption, decay in the laws and justice and things like that. They just start to get weakened. The financial system gets abused, and, the whole thing ends up coming down. That seems to be the cycle. But if people can recognize the cycle and push hard enough against it, I think it can be salvaged. That was, again, going back to the story of Nineveh, but as an example. But I'll give an example. Before Trump ever came into office, I was talking to some people because before marketing, I have a background in manufacturing, and I saw the country become deindustrialized. I go back to before NAFTA. I was involved in production and manufacturing, and I saw the whole system of factories, subcontractors, how I remember the day we used to make everything. Texas Instruments, we made our TV, we made our calculators, we made our washers and dryers, Westinghouse, GE, all that. It was all in the United States. The cars that we sold here were mostly made here, with very few exceptions. And we had, the chip making, everything was here. And that was when we flourished, right? And we gave it away. We deindustrialized. We gave it to Europe. We gave it to Mexico south of the border. We gave it to anybody but the U.S. and anybody but Europe, right? It just left. But Trump comes in and he recognizes that fact. And he says, no, we need to reindustrialize America. We need to bring manufacturing back. And he gets something like 19 trillion in commitments. I think 6 or 7 trillion actually in the works spending right now to bring manufacturing back, because he understands, and his administration understands, that if a nation is to be healthy, if it's to be great, if it's to be self-sustaining, it has to produce its own stuff. And even the medicines and everything else. It's a requirement. So you have somebody coming in who's being so forceful on that point and so forceful about shutting the borders and doing other things. I'm not saying everything's good, but I'm saying on the key things that have the potential to destroy society traditionally, in these cycles we've been talking about, his administration is standing up for key things. And we need that culture of wanting what's best for America to survive beyond this administration and pick up momentum. And I think if enough of us have that awareness, and if we can clean up the voting system to the point where it's really harder to steal elections, and we can get more of the right people in, I do think it can be turned around. It's a struggle. It's a battle. I mean, look at the spread of communism in this country, New York and Oregon and just places where these communist mayors are getting in. There's a definite push. I mean, our school system, our education system, these college professors that are turning these people into socialists, in big numbers. I mean, it's a corruption. It's a sickness. It's, I believe, an evil that needs to be overcome. But I think it can be overcome. Again, it's awareness. And I don't know about you, but I see a momentum here over the past, let's say, 10 years. I mean, we saw what happened in the last administration. So many people were kind of sick who knew what we needed. We were kind of sickened by what we saw, right? And then it starts to turn around after that administration's gone, and we're encouraged at some level, and still facing a lot of huge problems, no doubt. But we can see momentum. And again, getting back to the spiritual aspect of it, I think this is the way things work spiritually, is that when good people stand up to evil, it's my sense that God comes in and backs them. And that's why I said, if my people called by my name will turn from their evil ways and seek my face, I'll hear from heaven and heal their land. So we're not in it alone. That's what we have to remember. And again, I think courage is key. Courage comes back to faith. Faith is trying to do the right thing because you believe in God and you want to operate under his guidance and his rules. So I think that these are the people that have to be brave. You look at going back to the revolution. I heard statistics several times that this was a very small percentage of Americans back at the time who were willing to stand up for the country. But look at, they did it. Yeah. So we don't have to be this massive majority. I think we just need to be a strong-willed, very committed, very vocal and bold minority, and I think we can save this country. I really do.
Yeah. No, I'm looking for it right now, but to your point, there's a quote, and I'm trying to remember who it is, but I got it right here. But it's it does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men.
There you go.
Yeah.
Perfect. Who said that?
You know what? I will look that up for us right now.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
because,
that's awesome.
Yeah. In the minds of men.
I got to use that
Samuel
one.
Adams.
Okay. Yeah, no wonder, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. No, I agree with you, but that's always the way it is, right? Even in a work environment, there's, what is it, the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of people doing 20% of the work, 20% of people doing 80% of the work. That's exactly what's always driven change, I guess, is just that irate, tireless minority willing to set brush fires in the minds of men to get them to change. Wanted to ask you too, right? If the collapse of these 11 pillars happens, what does an America that's enduring that actually look like?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I hope and pray it doesn't happen. I mean, it just looks like a collapse and a loss of everything we've held dear. I mean, the 11 pillars, just real quickly, are borders, security and police protection, privacy, banking and finance, education, energy, environment, medical system, food supply, self-identity, and then faith itself. But I mean, it would look like the collapse of the banking system. It would look like the collapse of education, which that one is really bad already.
Oh, yeah.
The collapse of energy. And we were seeing that, seeing the collapse of energy. I've been on some podcasts with guys from Canada, and they talk about how up there, there's this movement, the Green New Deal type of movement, where they're trying to get away from fossil fuels in a country where you have sub-zero winter conditions for quite a bit of the whole nation, and they're saying that they're trying to move everything to electrical power, but they're not building the grid to support it. So it's just in their mind an intentional move toward collapse of their energy system. But I think it basically looks like devolving toward a third world nation. If you picture, like, I think things have gotten better in Mexico from what I've heard, but if you think of Mexico traditionally, where the cops are so corrupt, where the gangs own the cops, and there's no justice, and we see some of that in this country, where you have Boasberg and other judges, just trying to throw block moves that Trump's trying to make that are good moves, just for the sake of just slowing them down at every turn. So there's a lot of corruption in our own legal system as well, but not at that level. But you can imagine it being much more corrupt, and good can't prevail because there's so many evil people in so many places that it's checkmate, And I think that's what it would look like. It would look like that devolution into a third world nation.
What do you think the last linchpin locked in to where the momentum of this globalist plan is almost irreversible, like inside your pillars? Which one of those do you think is like the final step where turning it around it's over?
Yeah, I don't know that there's one necessarily. I think the most important pillar is the last one, which is faith itself. So that's pillar number 11. And at first, I was like kind of shocked or stunned, or just say surprised, because I'm thinking, is that a pillar? And the more I thought about it, especially when I studied into it, it's like, my gosh, it is a pillar. It's actually the most important one, because it's the pillar that gives people a spine. It's the pillar that is the last wall of resistance against tyranny. We think of the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms is kind of like a last wall of resistance against tyranny as well, in its own way, in a physical sense.
Yeah.
But like in a spiritual, mental, moral sense, your sense of courage and resistance, that all comes back to faith, because there has to be a reason that's bigger than your circumstances if you're going to be willing to resist, even to the point of death, to the point of imprisonment, to the point of financial loss, to where you say, no, I'm going to be true to myself. I'm going to face a judge one day. I'm accountable. And for the sake of my family and future generations, or whatever it is, I'm holding the line here. I am not giving in, and that's, I believe that some of our founders had that kind of faith and that kind of determination. And if that were to go, if the will to resist were to go, that would be, to me, the final collapse.
Yeah.
Because as long as there's a will to resist, it's hard for evil to have free reign. I mean, look at it you were in the military. just look at it in, say Vietnam or any kind of warfare where the other side is just not going to give up. It's really hard to conquer that nation, no matter how much air power or sea power or any other kind of power you have. If that nation is willing to be in a guerrilla warfare for the rest of their existence, they're not going to be conquered. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can't kill an idea.
Yeah. So that's on a human level, but on a spiritual level, that will to survive and to resist, I think all comes back to faith.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I almost think that there's like a subconscious passiveness that's going on, right? And somebody would not even say like overtly, like, oh, I have no will to put up a fight for this. I think that there's just this passivity, they don't care, and they don't recognize that as a departure from will to resist. It's just like, whatever, I have all the niceties that I could want right now. There's a book by a guy, his name is Jose Ortega Gasset, and he's talking about people who inherit culture specifically, and he calls them the airmen is what he calls them, is that HEIR, and that they've inherited this culture, and that they don't recognize that it wasn't just made for them, and they're sort of born inside of it the way like an animal's born into captivity, that it's actually something that needs to be taken care of. And he uses the example of a car, and he says that to them a car may as well be something that's plucked off of a tree. The car exists, therefore that's all it is. And it's not the years of innovation and design and engineering and manufacturing, all of these things that went into this thing. It just is, and that's it. There's no thought beyond it. And that's when people stop, feeling connected to the things around them, because they just look at it as the landscape that they were born into, not something that was manufactured by people who committed themselves to a higher level of, integrity and engineering, all of these things to build something that grand. And, it's just that it basically is saying it's a natural cognitive dissonance to everything that just happens. And it has to be a awareness that that's happening to you, and then a commitment to changing and recognizing things around you depend on you to keep going. And then you have to take action for those things. And obviously that's very difficult. Like you said before, the first step in solving a problem is to acknowledge that there's a problem. Well, the other step to that too is acknowledging you're part of the solution. How many times do you see somebody say, oh man, nobody's doing anything? Well, you're somebody. You could be that person doing something, And so it's just in an environment like that, there's no excuse to look at for this ambiguity of somebody else, right? You could be whomever it is that goes and gets on the school board to stop something from happening, or you go get involved in, whatever, land management and all these things that happen around your local community. How many people can tell you who an AOC or a Bernie Sanders is, but they couldn't tell you who sits on, the advisory board for their county or whatever, because it's just part of that, that microcosm of I just live here. I inherited all this stuff. Everything will be fine. I almost inherently take it for granted without even, realizing I'm taking it for granted. And that's how you wind up in these situations, I guess, with people who seem passive to everything going on around them, And, I see this too. There's almost this debate online about flock cameras, which I'm sure you've seen. And, there's people like, hey, I'm a cop, and those cameras have really helped us solve crimes that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise solve. And it's like, that's great. I'm really glad that that's happened, but never in the history of consolidating power, consolidating information, and mass surveillance has this ever gone well for, guess what? No. The reason, laws weren't created for people who are going to abide by them. They're created for the people who don't, so this surveillance state you're advocating for, because whatever crime it helped you solve, it'll get used against you. The historical precedent is that it will get used against you. You know what I'm saying? And so it's just
we saw that in a major way with how it was used against the Trump administration. I mean, my gosh, they tried to frame him into Russia collusion, and therefore we have the right to intercept every phone call, every transmission, and they did that for him and his whole circle.
Yeah.
And it was all an excuse. It was never based on anything real. And so that was, that at a national level, you're spying on the other campaign. Mm-hmm. So if they'll spy on the other campaign, who won't they spy on? They spied on members of Congress. You remember when Tucker Carlson, they were spying on the press. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It already happened. So with more surveillance, it's only going to happen more. That's a given.
Yeah. Well, it's just so funny too, because you bring up surveilling the opposing party. We had a president resign for these things, and now there are people who do much worse things, and the idea of resigning just never appears to them. It's so funny when you think about what happened with Nixon. It's just so benign compared to what we live in today. It's just like, I can't believe he resigned over that. Are we that far removed from men who Goldwater goes and holds him accountable? You know what I'm saying? It says like, hey, if you don't resign, then I'm going to turn everybody here against you. You need to do this. Like who's going and holding people accountable to that level, and people, you can argue whether he did the right thing or not or whatever in doing that, but just still, like, things are so much worse now. To think that was something a president resigned over is just sort of wild, I suppose. I wanted to ask you. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that in a perfect example, that's what's going on with Fauci right now. How is that man not behind bars, for God's sake?
I know what I mean? At least for criminal contempt. I mean, he got that pardon. He shouldn't be able. I mean, if he's sitting there saying he's pleading the fifth, well, then hold him in account for criminal contempt. He said it was like 111 times. Like, I'm sorry, like, just do something. I saw somebody, or a lot of people really, sharing Senator Moreno's comments, calling him a POS, standing outside the elevator. It's like, cool, I agree. Do something. That's not a win to me. You're not dunking on anybody by saying he's, a piece of crap. Like, I agree. Like, that's why you're there, to do something, not to get these one-liners that are going to go viral on the internet. I think that's everybody's just so sick and tired of that. But you brought up NAFTA earlier. I wanted to ask you, you of course probably remember the Clinton-Ross Perot, election. I was a kid, so my memories of that are very slim, and anything I've seen about it has been online. How prophetic do you think some of the things Ross Perot were campaigning on, how accurate do you think some of those are today? It's sort of wild, isn't it?
So true. Yeah. His famous line was, if NAFTA goes through, you're going to hear this great sucking sound, and that will be the sound of jobs leaving America. Yeah. He was spot on, spot on. So that's the main one I remember, but I'm sure he had some other zingers.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny. I do remember my dad making a comment about how he wished he would step down because he was going to pull votes away. And, that's what happened. I mean, he wasn't wrong, but like in hindsight, it really just feels like that he should have won, some of the things he was campaigning on. I haven't spent the time to look at his entire platform to know and, co-sign on everything he was running on genuinely, but I've seen enough of the video of him talking at least about some of these things. And it's just like, holy cow, this dude saw this coming from 10 miles away and was telling everybody about it. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And now we put all of our chips in the knowledge economy of sending everybody to college, and that it was just somehow, it's like the capitalist country didn't understand supply and demand. If you give everybody a bachelor's degree, it's now inherently worthless. I remember people joking like, oh, well, a master's degree is the new bachelor's. It's like, well, that's not a good thing, that's not a good thing at all, and
you're out of the workforce even longer before you become productive.
Yeah, exactly. It's so crazy. The world, this is such a trope, I suppose, but tropes have truth in them, that the world that I got told I was growing up into, I guess, as a millennial, that to go to college, I did. I have a bachelor's degree. I've got a grad degree, and it doesn't work anymore. Not the way, I mean, like, I had a career in the military, and I'm doing fine for myself because I made some smart decisions, but that's not the same for everybody. It's sort of nuts when you think about it. One of the other things though, maybe I wanted to go back to really fast. You'd brought up central banking digital currencies. And I wanted to ask your, kind of your thoughts on that. And I guess like why it obviously represents something worse than just digital transaction, and then in that relationship, to private property, which I think obviously also ties into, this thread of Marxism and these people that are getting installed in some of our major cities here in the United States.
Yeah, so you could say that on one level, we pretty much already have digital currency. It's digital in the sense that most transactions are credit card transactions.
Right.
80 to 85% of all retail purchases in the U.S., according to what I just looked up recently, are credit card. Cash varies on certain things. Brick and mortar stores, groceries sometimes are like 20% cash, but overall, we're pulling out our credit card almost everywhere, and that's digital. So you could say we're already at pretty much a digital system, but it's not a digital system in the sense of what they're looking for, which is basically smart digital, where it knows what you're buying at any point in time and can cut you off. And so it's full awareness. It's a system, AI driven, let's say, that has complete knowledge of everything going on, and then has control to turn your money off if you're outside of a certain geographical area, to control travel possibly, or to cut off too much red meat, carbon footprint, blah blah blah. You know what I mean? These
Trudeau
globalist
people in Canada.
Yeah, these globalist kind of principles that they can then enforce through their control of the money system at a very granular level. So that's what's different. But the next step beyond that is what there is called basically like a global ledger, where every piece of property is tokenized, and the deed or the ownership, you could say, for everything from your house to your car to your washing machine to everything you own is all tokenized and recorded in a digital system, and with the ability, if it is corrupted, to basically switch that ownership to someone else digitally. So yeah, you may have a piece of paper that says you're the deed owner to your house, but that wouldn't hold weight necessarily to the digital record that says you are not the owner anymore in like a worst case scenario. So, that control system thereafter, if you control the money, you basically control the world. And that's what they're trying to do, is turn it into a literal control system that's financially based if they get their full, dream system in. And, with the AI, with the surveillance that we're all seeing, it seems like we're moving almost inexorably toward this control grid. It just seems to get stronger and stronger. And other than some pushback in the UK, with the digital ID, I haven't really come across that much pushback here in the US or anywhere else. There's some, but nothing corresponding to the level of the threat that we're facing. I think we're still asleep, most of us.
No, I certainly agree with that. And you brought up AI. I wonder if you've seen in the news recently, it came to light that a lot of these big AI companies like Anthropic were buying up old books that are harder to get, and less of them are in print, or maybe they're not in print anymore. And they were using, I even learned that this was a machine, right, that will cut the spine off of a book. And they have this thing that it almost looks like the edge of like a binder, and it slides down in between these pages, and it uses light to scan pages, and then it shucks these pages off. It's really, really fast, and it pulls all the information from this page. You ever seen that? It's actually really...
No, that sounds interesting though.
It is. It's sort of wild. I'd never seen that before. But when they were doing that with these books, and obviously they're using it to train these language models, they were just getting rid of the books. They were just destroying them. They're gone.
Jeez,
right? Yeah. And these are, like I said, these are books that may not be in print anymore, or, there's a finite amount of every book, but you get what I'm saying, more of a finite amount of books. And then it reminds me of an interview that Sam Altman did from OpenAI, where he was talking about intelligence. He's, of course, talking about artificial intelligence being treated like a commodity the way that electricity, whatever energy that they are, that you'll pay, for access to this, maybe from, a grid, quote unquote, the way that you pay for electricity or cable or
in a
whatever.
way we are. We're paying for tokens already.
You are, but there is a free version, right? And it may not be as good, but in his mind, he sees this as an equivalent to, paying for electricity for your house or Wi-Fi access or whatever you're doing. So when you think about buying these old books en masse, destroying them, training a language model on them, and then, we have it on Claude or we have it on Chat GPT. So we'll just remake the book and then sell it and then make a profit off of it or whatever. Well, is that even accurate anymore? Because your models hallucinate all the time. If you control all the information and, there's, 500 people globally who have this book, how many of them are going to be able to correct the record when you start mass producing all of these? How many times have we looked at a history book from even the 60s and it talks about something that has been eradicated from history books today? And it's like, wow, that's a really important piece of context that I've never learned about. And, it requires a hefty amount of, personal time to go and research some of these things. It's so nuts that it really is like a paradoxical society we live in where we have all this information and you can go and get a lot of it, but because it's online, you always have to sort of wonder if what you're reading is accurate because even then, like a newspaper back in the day, if you bought, the Kansas City Star, you'd see, here's this article 3 weeks later, they'd correct the record to say, actually, at the factory fire, we printed 23 people lost their lives. It was 47, and there's an actual physical record of that. Whereas today they can just go and change it online. Maybe they don't annotate that. And there's been instances of that. I think just buying, and even with like movies, Gone with the Wind several years ago, they did that. All these people paid for a digital copy of Gone with the Wind. And then of course, because Gone with the Wind themes are, slavery and racism, the Civil War and all these things, it's like they removed it. I paid money for this. Well, if buying isn't owning, right, then what is it? You're leasing this to me. That can happen in so many other ways. It just goes right back to this concept of surveillance. Well, I'm using it to find out who did this hit and run, or I'm using it to see what car kidnapped this little kid off the street. That's great. I'm glad that you did that. But how is it being used against us? It's already been abused. There was the instance of somebody from Flock accessing a daycare center in Ohio to view what was going on. Like, why? What do you, on your own time? That's just, it's just terrible. There's just so many things, that require decent human beings to be in charge. And it's just, there's no way to regulate something like that. Your internal governor, so to speak, That's why Adam said that, the Constitution was written for a wholly upright and religious people. There's a point. That's why it's who it's written for. Because what I said before, if you don't follow those traditions, you're a citizen of the country in name only. You're not a citizen in the sense the way maybe the Romans would talk about citizenship and their concept of mos maiorum, the way of the ancestor and their sort of commitment to what got us here. It teaches us lessons, and it may not be what gets us to there, but I can learn something from this instead of this postmodernist notion that nothing has value and, everything, truth isn't real, truth is relative, all this stuff. It's just, we're just a completely and totally confused culture because of all of these things. It's okay that tradition exists. In fact, it's the standard, right?
Yeah, we need, I think we all need tradition, and we need to know where we came from, and we have to know what we believe. And, I think with all the technology, things have changed so fast. It really has molded culture. Go back to TV, just the evolution of television, and how that's changed culture with the sitcoms and the TV shows defining morality for people, making things look okay that weren't okay in prior generations. And yeah, we have to know who we are, and we have to, with our children, we have to bring them up in such a way that they understand the culture, they understand what it means to be part of the family, they understand, hopefully, their ancestry to some point, and that there's a sense of, values, what's right and wrong, and why we believe what we do, and to have some integrity, because there's so much of a temptation to drift in society because everything's electronic and we're getting bombarded with ideas and concepts. I mean, you look at these kids in college who don't even understand what communism really is and the disaster it's been all around the world through history and how it's enslaved people and millions have been killed by their own governments in these communist countries. And they don't understand any of that. And they're just blindly following, some communists from New York, thinking that this is all great, and all being kind of brought into that culture through college. With no sense of the past. So that's just an example of how we need to know history. We have to understand culture, where we came from, what our values are. Otherwise, we're gonna drift.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say about that, because I want to talk to you about depopulation, but the laziest argument I see being recycled online over and over again is this notion that the United States is a socialist country already because we have, things like public libraries or the, fire departments or police stations are public or
right.
whatever. The military is a social program, all these things. It's like, that's socialism. Why are you so afraid of socialism? It's like, that's so dumb and so skin deep when it comes to what these things actually are. We are a capitalist economy with social programs that are there. They're installed. They are run on our capitalist economy. It's not the same. And to your point earlier about Mao, in China. Well, it wasn't the system Mao installed to compete with the USSR and the production of Great Britain trying to outdo Great Britain. It was everything the United States did for them that created this. And, also too, there's historical precedent for this, like Otto von Bismarck, right? In Germany, again, going back to Germany, installed some series of socialism style laws or social program style laws. And in his, I remember which speech it was, he gives this whole, but one of the points he makes is that these things to help the people are to combat the socialists. And he uses this concept of a social program as a way to combat the ideology that is socialism, which is obviously rooted in Marxist theory. It's just, these are not the same thing. And simple history really disproves this notion of the fact that, well, because the library is public, somehow we're socialists. If that's the, if that's the standard, then, I guess China is capitalist because Mao collectivized all these farms and mining and industry and then sold it on the market, right? That doesn't make it capitalist. He's just selling money. It's just not the same thing at all. But I wanted to ask you about depopulation because this is a topic that frightens a lot of people, and for obvious reasons. But when you in the book talk about depopulation for anybody who's listening, what is the mode here for that? What's the end state, right, for the globalist plan for this to happen? Why depopulation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, some things go hand in hand with depopulation. I think the main benefit the globalists have is a smaller population is easier to manage. It's easier to control. You take a prison population that's getting out of control, right? You get too many prisoners in a prison and, riots can happen. Things can get out of control. You don't have enough guards to keep them under control. It's, that may seem like an odd parallel, but it just brings up a true fact that the more people you have, the harder it is to gain control over them. So if we decrease the population nation by nation, we can bring it down to a level that we are totally in control and we have ironclad control, absolute control, iron grip. I think that's really the fundamental principle that's at work here. And it's interesting that it seems like the biggest effort to depopulate is in the Western countries, which are the countries that are the source of Christianity spreading and which are the source of Western civilization and the rule of law and justice and expectations from government that they treat us fairly, right? That laws are just, that everyone's treated the same. The whole English and American system of laws, even the Roman system of laws, there was there's a fundamental sense of justice built into it and expectation that doesn't really exist so much in the third world.
Mm-hmm.
So I think personally that's the reason that they go after the Western world hardest in terms of depopulation. But I think it's just the main first step because you have to break down the leadership, right? To break down the leadership first, and then everyone, again, if we went back to the prison population, if you had certain prisoners who were like the leaders among the others, you would go after them first. If your intent was to get control.
Crowd control tactic, yeah.
Crowd control, yeah. So I think that's the general principle behind it. I think at a spiritual level, it's basically to destroy everything good that God created. And God's highest creation, his final creation, is man, man and woman, mankind.
Right.
But then right behind that, you look what they're doing to the planet, with the chemtrails and the chemicals that are kind of raining down on us constantly on our food, even our cattle being injected with hormones and with with vaccinations that are very questionable. I mean, you look at the lack of regular seed-bearing plants that are being replaced by Monsanto plants that don't even have seeds in them. You know what I mean? I got to keep buying the plants from the seeds from Monsanto,
Right.
to grow your crops. It's this undoing of the natural order of creation. And it extends
Correct.
even to man and woman. What is man? What is woman? What's a boy? What's a girl? Is it fluid? Is it not fluid? It's that attempt to undo the whole natural order, which is basically God's order. I think at a spiritual level, that's really the overarching plan. We can see it everywhere.
Yeah. There's a line from Musashi in the Five Rings. I don't know if you've ever read that one before, but one of the line is, once you know the way broadly, you see it in all things. And that's exactly what it is you're talking about. When you see what it is that God values, what he made for us, why he loves us, and you see the things that are subverting it, it's literally the mirror image of these things. And it just becomes so apparent to you that it's a subversion of what God created and what he has intended for us. And that to me is just the biggest indicator of the fact that this is a spiritual battle going on. Because like you said, getting human beings, right? This should be no more obvious thing in the world, right, than the fact that there's man and woman. But now we have this perfidious ideology that kids can transition, and there's something. My 3-year-old told me X, Y, and Z, and now he's walking around in dresses, and I'm going to go talk to a doctor about hormone therapy or whatever, and it's a total perversion. That's what I was looking for, of everything that's been intended for us and why we were created. To the depopulation thing, in your mind, is this like a mass event, the way I guess sort of COVID could have been, right, where a bunch of people die sort of all at once, maybe, or in a short period of time, right, like a year or 2 years? Or is this a longer process that sort of arrives at the same result?
I mean, I think overall it's a longer process, but it's also punctuated by events that are designed to achieve, mass depopulation at a certain scale, whether it's world wars, whether it's pandemic outbreaks that are engineered, whether it's on a smaller scale, whether it's just crime and corruption and death and disease, the economy being so bad that people are dying. Like when I was explaining the thing about the seeds, in India, the farmers that were committing suicide, I read a few years ago, because they had to buy these seeds from Monsanto and they couldn't afford to plant the next season of crops, where before they had regular seed-bearing crops, they had their seeds, they replanted, and they couldn't keep up anymore. And a percentage of them were committing suicide.
Oh, wow.
And, it's just, it seems with them, it's death by 1,000 cuts. But they also have the big plans and the bold plans. To me, the whole thing with COVID was a big, bold plan to try to reduce the population on a large scale. It didn't come off the way they intended it to, because people woke up and started pushing back. But I think it's actually both.
Yeah. I think that one of the ways that COVID was successful is that it pushed people further into camps, So the next time something like that happens, I guess whatever you want to call it, this balkanization of thought around this, it'll be harder, I guess, to team up with one another, and you'll be mad at your neighbor a little bit more than you were before, right? I think there's that video, I've posted it on my my podcast before, of the National Guard in Minnesota when Tim Walz is governor, and they're shooting paintballs at people on their steps for not being inside during a curfew. And that was during the BLM riots that were going on right after George Floyd's death. But that sort of thing, it just is coupled with this, that people, all these actions that the U.S. government took, or like local governments and all this, that people can look at this objectively and see two different things, right? Some people say, well, they should have been inside, like to use this example of the National Guard shooting. And some people are like, well, screw that. Like, no, you're not going to shoot at me on my doorstep, or these are people just standing on their doorstep. They're not out in the street. They're not causing a problem. They did more to corral those law-abiding people just standing on their doorstep than they did the people setting fires and looting, right? You let all this, it just goes back to, that's like the theme of this conversation, right? Is it's not incompetence, it's on purpose. But,
right.
It just goes back to, there's all this stuff going on over here that you're not doing anything about. You're more worried about the people who are interested in being law-abiding citizens because they value the society that we live in and want it to function. It just, I was a cop, right, for almost 15 years. And so I say this as somebody who, used to be one, and I have friends who are police officers, and I don't think every cop is a bad cop. But in the history of the arrival of totalitarian regimes, people are worried about like the military turning on them or whatever. It's like, no, it's the police forces. It's always been the police forces. These people. It kind of goes back to your point earlier about when your job is on the line and you've got family to feed or whatever. Your motivation may not necessarily be to harm your fellow man, but a byproduct of that is that you are, and so I'm not saying necessarily like police are your enemy. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying just to be mindful of the longer leash you give them to surveil you with flock, or maybe like qualified immunity, some of these things that they have that allow them to get away. I think body cameras are a great thing. They sort of expose both the police officer and their tactics, and then obviously the criminal. That right there, that's as objective as you can get, so to speak. But well, actually, which really makes me think of one of the other questions I wanted to ask you was about manufacturing reality, right? Like things like Project Bluebeam or whatever. Sort of your takeaways on that in your book, that people can get into it and read about, but would love to hear from you.
Yeah, it's the book opens up with two quotes from the two CIA directors, William Casey and William Colby. I'm looking at the book right now on the inside flap. William Casey says, we will know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. And a related quote from another CIA director, William Colby: the Central Intelligence Agency owns everyone of any significance in the major media. So their goal is deception, and they own the media as a way to pull it off. So they have the channel and they have the goal, at least back then. And one of the greatest deceptions, we talk about this Project Bluebeam, one of the greatest deceptions they have in their playbook, allegedly, is this thing we call Project Bluebeam, although that's not the official name for it, which is a plan to deceive the public all over the world, that a major event happened, and therefore we need to come together as one world to fight it. And the event, there's two major kind of events. One is an alien invasion, which we've seen with the Will Smith movies and all the movies. It seems like so many of them have the theme of we're being attacked from outer space, and they're hovering above the cities, and here they come. Well, the Project Bluebeam is basically the ability to project either holographically or some other way in the sky an image of what looks like a genuine alien invasion for the purpose of manipulating through fear, manipulating mankind into this, there's one world we need to pull together and, to gain that control over mankind through that psychology. The other form of Project Bluebeam was to fake the return of Christ or the rapture that many people believe in, that, there's this event coming where the Christians will be extracted from the earth before the worst happens. And the psychology of it will be to fake that happened, maybe project a hologram of Christ or the angels or something in the sky.
Sure.
And guess what? They all got left behind. That almost everybody got left behind.
Right.
And so there's this despair, like, oh my God, it happened. And now here we are, we're going through the worst. And again, it's to manipulate through fear, to then say we have to pull together, come together under a world government or some other type of manipulation. But it's the thing that's amazing is these plans have been in work for decades, just waiting for the technology to catch up to it, right? Just like kind of like the manipulation plan has been around for a long time to get control of people through the financial system. It just takes enough time for the technology to catch up to where they really can with AI and everything else implement the plan. But the plan has a long history, and this Project Bluebeam does as well. And we're at the place where it could probably be pulled off, and a lot of people would be fooled, although enough people are aware of it that it would be much harder to pull it off now than it would have been had they not been. So, I haven't seen it, but I've heard that, like in Japan, they do fireworks through this, that they don't do real fireworks. They light up the sky with lasers and stuff to make it look like it. And, they can do things through swarms of drones to make something appear visual, where it could be hundreds or thousands of drones, flying in formation, lit up a certain way to create an illusion in the sky. I mean, with enough technology, almost anything's possible. Enough technology and enough AI, enough interconnectedness between everything that you could actually pull off something that seems impossible.
Right. Yeah. Now, some of those drone shows are actually pretty wild, how sophisticated they are, to program those things to move in unison. It's like synchronized swimming in the air with drones.
Yeah.
Sort of interesting. Well, the last thing I'll ask you as we sort of wrap up is, what can people do, right, at their level individually to prevent this from happening?
Yeah, there's several things. I think in terms of preventing it, I think the main thing to prevent it is passing the knowledge, sharing the knowledge, being vocal, getting the truth out, getting people to, watch certain podcasts, convincing them, exposing them one way or another to the truth. The book, I believe, has the power to turn a doubter into a believer. The book is written both for people who kind of know what's going on, to fill in the blanks. There's 175 QR codes linking to source documents, linking to videos, linking to globalists saying things in their own words. So the book is written with text. You use your phone, hit a QR code, go watch a video, come back to the book. It's a much more convincing experience than reading would normally be. So the book's one way. But however it is, passing that knowledge around is what it's going to take. That's going to be what actually can prevent it. In terms of protecting yourself, in the final third of the book, I get into some things that you can do to protect yourself. And these are not, earth-shaking ideas or things we've all heard of, but it gives it to you in a place where you can use the QR codes and take action. Things like, getting a backup food supply, backup energy supply, doing things like diversifying your finances into a portion of it being in physical gold, physical silver, to be able to set yourself up in the worst case scenario, almost like as an insurance policy, to be able to be in a position to be self-sufficient or to have things you can barter with, grow your own food, that kind of thing. But again, all the QR codes are there, so you can actually buy the stuff or research it and then buy it, whatever. None of these are affiliate links. They're just links to where you can find the stuff if you want to take a shortcut and just get it done, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's great that
but
you did that.
the book also talks about being mentally resilient and spiritually resilient, and to me, that is key. So mentally resilient, it goes through, okay, we know that the globalists, when you get to this point in the book, at this point you say, okay, I'm aware of all the things, or at least these major things that they've tried to do, that they're trying to pull off. Where would they go from here? So it goes through kind of a mind experiment. What could they do next in each of these 11 areas, these areas of collapse? And it takes you through some possibilities. And the point of doing that is to just kind of help everybody open their minds to, wow, yeah, they might try that. And therefore, if they do, I'm not going to be surprised when it happens. I'm not going to be shocked. I'm not going to be thrown into a state of fear. I've kind of prepared myself that they might try these things next. So that's the mental resilience chapter. And then there's a spiritual, it ends with a spiritual chapter, basically encouraging people to, grow their faith, to turn to God, to build the faith of their children, to make faith a normal part of the culture within their family. And that is the ultimate resilience, because with faith dispels fear. It brings conviction. It brings purpose. It makes things solid. So even in a chaotic world with enough faith, things are manageable.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the best bastions against any of that is building strong families and having kids and teaching them these things. And then too, when people hear the word militia, they tend to think of, like the colonial sense, or just, people that are armed up and they're out and about as volunteers. This is something you can do today. It doesn't have to be this, I guess, antiquated notion that you have. Like, you should find the men in your community and train with them. Yeah, that's absolutely something you should do. Exercise your Second Amendment right and to bear arms. But, learning what everybody in your neighborhood, this guy's good at fixing cars. This guy's really good with electronics. This guy's really good at, I live in Northern California. I live near several farmers. These guys are very useful, in these events. That's your militia. That's your people. That's the people that you can get to know one another, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. You can come up with contingency plans together. That sort of figuring yourself out, having a strong family of your own, branching out to other people in your community, and then building a network that way, that's you building a community of people you can depend on when something like this happens. And then you get to know one another, you train with one another, maybe you come up with things that you can do for yourselves and box out some of this bureaucracy in your community that you don't need. It's just, all of this hinges on you as the individual taking action yourself and being the kind of person to stand up for this, and then having a family, who is a strong unit, a mom and a dad, having a spiritual and faith core, having kids that understand, how to take care of themselves. They know how to be self-reliant. Like, not saying like, don't let your kids have a childhood, certainly, but that they grow up seeing you be the example. I think it's very important too, like real fast, that if you, and I have sons, that they see you have healthy relationships with other men as well, because, I think men in general, we tend to check one another, whether it's overt or covertly or subconsciously, against one another, and sort of build, a relationship that way. And you tend to look at one another as, well, he's really good at this, and, how can I learn from him? Or how can, how many times did you have maybe if you played sports growing up, you had a coach? Most often that's another man, and, you encourage, like, I know when my son plays baseball, his coach, obviously another guy, hey, you need to listen to him. Like, it's good to hear that, and tell him, like, you need to listen to your coach, what he's trying to teach you, to learn that that person, that other guy is another way for you to learn. And, that there's trust here that you can build and learn from other people. It's just some of these things that, really, it's just all these solutions exist inside you, your family unit, and then your community. You just have to be proactive about them and seek them out. So.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a big community. I mean, it can be, 4 or 5 or 6 people that you're close to and you form a bond with, because everybody knows somebody else. I mean, you don't have to have everything you need within that little group of people, but some people are connected to farmers, like you said. They might be connected to electricians or whatever, but to have that relationship and to have that level of trust that you're kind of on the same page, you're like-minded about your concerns, and if you can find that group, it's gold. I think that's golden to have that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like what you said, it doesn't have to be a large group of people at all. To go back to our point about the irate, tireless minority. If you've got 6 families, maybe you're talking about 24 to 30 people. That's a pretty large group of people in and of itself. 6 men can get a lot of things done, quite honestly. Right. And to your point, everybody knows somebody else. So, but hey, listen, I really, really appreciate you coming on and talking to me and sharing your book, and would like to give you the opportunity to tell people where they can go to find it, and any other social media, other things that you have where people can access you, your message, your information, all that stuff.
Sure. So the best place to go is globalcollapsebook.com. globalcollapsebook.com, and on there you can also, there's links to get it on Amazon. You could go straight to Amazon, look for the Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything. It'll pop right up. But on the website, there's signed copies you can get, a single signed copy, paperback, hardback, and there's paperback bundles, 3, 6, 12, and 18. The whole idea is to spread the word, to share the knowledge with other people. And I do have people that buy them in that. I sell more sets of 3 than I sell single copies, to be honest with you.
Oh, that's awesome.
And because they're signed copies, and in bundles, it's as cheap as an unsigned copy, and it's more persuasive to be able to give somebody like, hey, I got a signed copy of this book for you. You got to check this out. Much more likely to read it, and that's why I do it. I'm all about trying to get the message out. Anybody that knows anything about, has any experience trying to write a book and sell it, you don't make money on books, not today, unless you're a big selling author. Right. You get $3 or $4 a book when you sell it on Amazon. The average publisher-backed author only sells 3,000 copies. So do the math. That's $12,000 for the process of writing a book, and not to mention all the other costs you have to get it to market. And so it's not a money thing. It's an awareness thing. That's why we're doing this, right. To get the word out, just, our little contribution. globalcollapsebook.com. If you go to the footer, there's the social media links there. I have a podcast I started on Rumble, rumble.com/The Globalist Plan. You can check out, some other interviews and things like that on related topics. And I'd be honored if you got the book or check me out on Rumble. And let's spread the word. That's why we're here, trying to get that awareness out there and turn this thing around.
Outstanding. Well, I'll put the links in the description as well, guys. So if you're listening, please go check out the links. You can access the website, and I'll put one in there to take you to Amazon so you can pick up the book as well. And again, thank you so much for coming on. We're on Rumble too. I'll talk to you about that when we get off here, but I hope that you have a great weekend, and maybe we'll have you back on here in the future. That'd be pretty cool.
All right. Sounds great, Brandon. Thanks. Great being with you.